The air inside the Oakland gymnasium was thick with anticipation. It was a cool evening in the mid-1960s, and the fading daylight barely pushed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Outside, the city hummed with its usual rhythm, cars passing, distant conversations, the echo of footsteps on concrete. But inside this space, time seemed to slow down. 400, maybe 500 people had gathered, shoulder to shoulder, forming a tight circle around a cleared area in the center of the room. Some stood on benches. Others craned their necks from the back rows. Everyone wanted to see him. BruceLee stood in the middle of that circle, calm and still, his hands relaxed at his sides. He wore a simple black shirt and dark pants, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed for attention. His expression was neutral, almost unreadable, but his eyes carried a quiet intensity that pulled you in if you stared long enough. He was not there to perform, he was there to teach. This was not a movie set, this was not choreographed, this was real. The demo class had been advertised as a chance to witness something different, a new way of thinking about martial arts, a philosophy that broke from tradition and focused on practicality, efficiency, and truth. Bruce had been doing this for months now, opening his school to non-Chinese students, teaching anyone willing to learn. And that decision had not gone unnoticed. In certain circles, it was seen as a betrayal. In others, it was seen as a revolution. The crowd murmured softly, a low hum of excitement and curiosity. Some had heard stories. Others had seen him move in small exhibitions. But most were here because they wanted to know if the rumors were true, if this young man from Hong Kong really had something to say that could challenge decades, even centuries, of martial tradition. Bruce took a breath and stepped forward. His voice was steady, clear, cutting through the noise without needing to be loud. He spoke about water, about how it adapts to any container, flows around obstacles, becomes soft or hard depending on the situation. He spoke about the limitations of rigid styles, how they could trap a fighter in outdated patterns, make them predictable, slow to respond. He spoke about freedom in combat, about instinct, about stripping away the unnecessary and keeping only what works. The room listened. Some nodded. Others frowned, uncomfortable with the ideas, but everyone was locked in. Then the door at the far end of the gym swung open. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. A man walked in, his steps deliberate, his posture upright and stiff with confidence. He was older than Bruce, maybe in his 40s, dressed in traditional kung fu attire, loose silk pants, a fitted top with frog buttons, black cloth shoes. His hair was slicked back, his jaw set. He moved like someone used to being watched, used to commanding respect without asking for it. He did not smile. He did not bow. Behind him, a small group followed, students perhaps or supporters. They stayed near the door, watching, waiting. The man walked straight toward the center of the room, his gaze fixed on Bruce. The crowd parted slowly, instinctively, creating a path. The atmosphere shifted. What had been curiosity now became tension. Everyone could feel it. Bruce did not move. He stood in place, arms still relaxed, expression unchanged. He watched the man approach with the same calm he had carried the entire evening. No surprise, no concern, just awareness. The man stopped a few feet away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, uncomfortable. Then the man's voice cut through it, sharp and deliberate. You teach outsiders, you disrespect tradition. You think you can ignore the masters who came before you and create your own way. That is arrogance. His words were not a question, they were an accusation. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some exchanged glances. Others stayed frozen, eyes darting between the two men. Bruce's face remained still. He did not defend himself. He did not argue, he simply listened. The man continued, his tone growing harder. I challenge you, here, now, no rules, real fight. Let everyone see if your philosophy means anything when someone who knows the old ways stands in front of you. The room went completely silent. Not a single cough, not a single shuffle of feet. 500 people holding their breath at once. This was no longer a demo. This was no longer a lesson. This had become something else entirely. Bruce took a slow breath. He looked at the man, then at the crowd, then back at the man. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted, sharpened. He nodded once. "Okay," that was all he said. One word, calm, certain, final. The crowd erupted into murmurs, whispers spreading like wildfire. Some people stepped back instinctively, creating more space. Others leaned in, unable to look away. The man across from Bruce smiled slightly, the kind of smile that comes from confidence, from certainty that the outcome is already decided. Bruce did not smile. He did not posture. He simply adjusted his stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced, hands loose. He looked relaxed, almost casual, but anyone who understood fighting could see the coiled readiness beneath the surface. The man took his stance, traditional, formal, rooted. His feet planted firmly, his hands up in a classical guard. He looked strong, immovable, like a statue carved from stone. For a moment they just stood there, two men separated by philosophy, by approach, by belief. The air between them felt electric, charged with something unspoken. The crowd watched, barely breathing. Then, without warning, it began. The traditional master moved first. He stepped forward with measured confidence, his lead hand extending in a straight strike aimed at Bruce's chest. A textbook opening, designed to test distance, to establish control. His form was clean, his technique precise, the kind of movement practiced thousands of times until it became muscle memory. Bruce did not block, he shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. A small adjustment of his hips, a slight turn of his shoulder, and the strike passed by him as if he had never been there. The master's fist cut through empty air. His eyes widened for just a fraction of a second, confusion, maybe, or surprise. But he recovered quickly, resetting his stance, pulling his arm back into position. Bruce still had not attacked. He stood just outside range, watching, reading, his body loose but his mind sharp. His eyes tracked every movement, every shift of weight, every tensing of muscle. He was not reacting. He was anticipating. The master tried again, this time with a combination. A faint high, followed by a low kick aimed at Bruce's lead leg. It was a classic setup, meant to force a defensive reaction to create an opening. But Bruce did not bite. He pulled his leg back slightly, just enough to let the kick miss by inches. And as the master's weight shifted forward, Bruce moved in. It happened fast. Not wild, not chaotic, but fast. Bruce closed the distance in a single fluid motion, his lead hand flicking out like a whip, a quick jab that snapped toward the master's face. The master raised his guard to block, and in that instant Bruce changed levels. His rear hand drove forward, low and tight, aimed directly at the ribs. The punch landed with a dull, hollow thud. The master's body buckled slightly, his breath catching. He tried to step back to create space, but Bruce was already there, moving with him, cutting off angles, staying in the pocket. Another strike. This one faster, sharper, aimed at the solar plexus. The master's guard dropped instinctively to protect his body, and Bruce's lead hand shot up again, stopping just an inch from his throat. 8 seconds had passed. The master froze. His chest heaved, his eyes wide, locked on the fist hovering in front of his windpipe. Bruce held it there for a moment, perfectly still, perfectly controlled. He did not need to say anything. The message was clear. This could have ended differently. Then Bruce pulled his hand back, stepped away, and lowered his guard. The master stood there motionless, his body still tense, his mind trying to catch up with what had just happened. His breathing was ragged, uneven. His hands, which had been so firm and confident moments ago, now trembled slightly. He looked down at his own chest, then back at Bruce, and something in his expression changed. The arrogance was gone. The certainty was gone. What remained was something quieter, something deeper, understanding, maybe even respect. He took a slow breath, steadied himself, and then bowed, low, deliberate, genuine. "I understand," he said, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier edge. Bruce nodded once, returning the bow. No gloating, no triumph, just acknowledgement. The crowd remained silent for a heartbeat longer, processing what they had just witnessed. Then slowly the murmurs began again, rising into scattered applause, uncertain at first but growing steadier. Some people looked stunned. Others looked inspired. A few still seemed unable to believe it had ended so quickly. Bruce turned to face the audience. He did not raise his voice, but somehow everyone heard him. "This is not about defeating someone," he said, his tone calm but firm. "This is about truth. In a real fight, there are no rules, no referees, no second chances. Tradition is valuable, but only if it serves you. If it becomes a cage, if it makes you predictable or rigid, then it is useless." He paused, letting the words settle. "You saw what happened just now. It was not about style. It was not about strength. It was about timing, distance, and control, about seeing the opening and taking it without hesitation. That is what works. That is what matters." The master, still standing nearby, listened. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. He simply stood there, absorbing the lesson. Bruce continued. "Water does not fight. It adapts. It moves. It finds the path of least resistance and flows through it. That is how you survive. That is how you win. Not by clinging to forms that no longer serve you, but by becoming formless. By being ready for anything." He looked around the room, his gaze sweeping over the faces in the crowd. Young students, older practitioners, people from different backgrounds, different beliefs. All of them had come here tonight expecting something, and now they were getting it. "When you train," Bruce said, "do not train to look good. Train to be effective. Do not train to impress your teacher or your peers. Train to survive. Strip away everything that does not work. Keep only what is useful. That is Jeet Kune Do. That is the way of the intercepting fist." The room was silent again, but this time it was different. This was not the silence of shock or tension. This was the silence of people thinking, reflecting, absorbing. Bruce turned back to the master, who met his eyes. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Bruce extended his hand. The master hesitated for only a second before taking it. They shook hands, firm, respectful, equal. "Thank you," the master said quietly. Bruce nodded. "Thank you." The master turned and walked back toward the door, his students following behind him. The crowd parted once more, but this time there was no hostility, no judgment, just quiet respect. As the door closed behind them, the energy in the room shifted again. People began talking, asking questions, moving closer to Bruce. Some wanted to train, others wanted to understand. All of them wanted more. Bruce answered what he could, spoke to those who approached, but his mind was already elsewhere. He had made his point. He had shown them what he believed. Now it was up to them to decide what to do with it. The gymnasium slowly emptied as the evening wore on. Small groups lingered near the edges of the room, still discussing what they had seen, replaying the moment in their minds, trying to understand how something so decisive could happen so quickly. Some of them would leave tonight and never think about it again. Others would carry this moment with them for years, let it reshape the way they thought about discipline, about control, about what it meant to truly be prepared. Bruce stood near the center of the room, speaking quietly with a few students who had stayed behind. They asked about footwork, about timing, about how to develop the kind of awareness he had demonstrated. He answered patiently, breaking down the movements, explaining the principles, but always bringing it back to the same core idea: simplicity, efficiency, truth. One of the younger students, a kid no older than 20, looked at him with wide eyes and asked, "How do you stay so calm? Even when someone challenges you like that, you don't seem angry or afraid. How do you do it?" Bruce thought for a moment before answering. "Emotion is natural," he said. "Fear, anger, excitement, they are all part of being human. But in a fight, they cloud your judgment. They make you tense. They make you react instead of respond. So you train yourself to acknowledge the emotion, but not let it control you. You feel it and then you let it pass through you like water passing through your fingers. The kid nodded slowly, absorbing the words. Control, Bruce continued, is not about suppressing what you feel. It is about choosing how you act in spite of what you feel. That is real strength. Not the strength to destroy, but the strength to hold back when you have the power to destroy. Another student, older, more experienced, asked, what if the master had been faster? What if he had been better prepared? Bruce smiled faintly. Then I would have adapted. I would have found another way. That is the point. You cannot predict every situation, every opponent, every variable. But you can train yourself to be flexible, to read what is happening in real time and to adjust. That is why style does not matter. Only adaptability matters. He glanced toward the door where the master had exited. That man was not weak. His technique was solid. His training was legitimate, but he was trapped by it. He expected me to fight the way he was taught to fight. And when I did not, he had no answer. That is the danger of tradition without evolution. The students listened, some of them nodding, others still processing. Bruce looked around the room one more time at the worn floorboards, the high windows, the chalk marks on the walls where targets had been drawn and erased over the months. This place had become something more than just a training hall. It had become a proving ground, a place where ideas were tested, where philosophy met reality, where people came to challenge their assumptions and walk away changed. He had known from the beginning that this path would not be easy. Opening his school to non-Chinese students had already brought criticism, resentment, even threats. Some saw it as disrespect, others saw it as betrayal. But Bruce had never been interested in guarding secrets or maintaining hierarchies. He believed that truth should be available to anyone willing to seek it, regardless of race, background, or lineage. And tonight had been another step in proving that belief. The master who had walked through that door had come with the weight of tradition behind him, with the expectation that Bruce would crumble under the pressure of a public challenge. But he had not crumbled. He had not faltered. He had simply done what he always did, stayed present, stayed calm, and acted when the moment was right. 8 seconds. That was all it had taken. Not because he was faster or stronger, but because he had been willing to see the situation for what it was and respond accordingly. No wasted movement, no hesitation, just clarity. One of the students spoke up again, breaking the silence. "Do you think he learned anything tonight?" Bruce considered the question. "I think he learned that his way is not the only way. Whether he chooses to explore that further is up to him, but at least now he knows. And that is more than he knew before." The group nodded, and slowly they began to gather their things, preparing to leave. Bruce watched them go, one by one, until only a handful remained. He walked over to the small table near the corner of the room where he had left a towel and a water bottle. He took a slow drink, letting the cool liquid settle his breathing, and then leaned against the table, looking out at the empty space where the fight had taken place. In his mind, he replayed the sequence. The master's opening strike, the shift, the feint, the change of level, the controlled finish. It had all happened so fast, but in the moment it had felt slow, deliberate, almost meditative. That was what happened when you trained long enough, hard enough, with the right focus. Time did not speed up. You slowed down. Your mind sharpened. Your body moved without thinking. But it was not just about the physical. It was about the mental, the emotional, the philosophical. It was about understanding that combat was not about dominance or ego. It was about survival, about protecting yourself and those you cared about being able to walk away when the fight was over without carrying the weight of unnecessary violence. He had stopped his fist at the master's throat not because he had to, but because he chose to. That choice, that control, was the real victory, not the speed, not the precision, the restraint. Bruce pushed himself off the table and walked toward the door. The night air outside was cool and crisp, carrying the faint smell of rain that had not yet fallen. The streets were quieter now, the city settling into its evening rhythm. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the dim streetlights, the silhouettes of buildings against the darkening sky. He thought about the people who had been in that room tonight. The ones who had watched with excitement, with skepticism, with hope. The ones who had seen something shift in their understanding, even if they could not yet put it into words. And the master who had walked in with arrogance and walked out with humility. That was the real lesson, not the fight itself, but what it represented. The willingness to be challenged, the courage to face your limitations, the wisdom to recognize when you have been bested, and the grace to accept it. Bruce turned back toward the gym, took one last look at the space where it had all happened, and then closed the door behind him. The story would spread, people would talk, some would exaggerate, others would dismiss it. But the truth would remain, simple and undeniable. On that night in that place in front of 500 witnesses, a young man with a new philosophy had been tested, and he had answered with precision, with control, and with respect. Not with violence, not with ego, but with truth. And in the end, that was all that mattered, because the real fight is never against another person. It is always against yourself, your fear, your doubt, your need to prove something to the world. And the only way to win that fight is to let go of everything that does not serve you, to become like water, and to move forward with clarity and purpose. That is the lesson Bruce Lee taught that night. And it is a lesson that still echoes today, decades later, in the hearts and minds of anyone who has ever faced a challenge and chosen to meet it not with force, but with understanding. So ask yourself this: when you are tested, when someone challenges everything you believe in, when the world demands that you prove yourself, will you fight from ego, or will you fight from truth? Will you cling to tradition, or will you adapt? Will you seek to dominate, or will you seek to understand? Because in those 8 seconds, Bruce Lee showed us that the answer to all of those questions is the same. Be water.